Like, a lot of these guys rely on training and logistics from the Iranian state. Having said that, however, when they operate independently of the Iranian state, I think that it allows them to Trump shares his message to Israel's Netanyahu and Iran, keep going. What is this? Okay. I'm not going to do the Roblox thing today, or maybe later when I have time. New, Iran sends formal reply to latest U.S. ceasefire nuclear proposals reported by Amwaj Media, citing informed sources in Tehran and the region. Iran has reportedly delivered its official response to a June 17th proposal from U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff aimed at resolving the standoff over Tehran's nuclear program. The response was sent to the White House shortly before noon, June 18th, and, according to a senior source cited by Amwaj Media, amounted to a polite no, but with a good explanation. The proposal, reportedly floated as part of back-channel diplomacy, included a potential meeting involving U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. A key sticking point: the U.S. has pushed for Iran's nuclear enrichment program to be completely dismantled or replaced by a multinational consortium located outside of Iranian territory. Tehran rejected that demand, but signaled it could accept the consortium if any facility remains based inside of Iran. America's maximalist goals are that Iran cannot have any civil nuclear power. They cannot have a nuclear power grid whatsoever. It is obviously a non-starter. Okay? Iran, in previous formations in the JCPOA, was perfectly willing to abide by international standards and perfectly willing to let in international investigators to consider enrichment programs. The demand that they cannot have a nuclear power plant or a nuclear power grid at all, while simultaneously only allowing nuclear energy from outside sources, is ridiculous. This country demands sovereignty. It has sovereignty. It's understandable that they want to have their own energy grid. But once again, I don't believe that the real purpose here, the real purpose here is to squash their nuclear energy grid at all. I think the real goal here is to dismantle and destabilize Iran permanently so that they can violently enact the regime change, or even if they can't enact regime change, destabilize it thoroughly. Here is Amal Saad, who is a scholar of Hezbollah and the politics of the resistance axis, previously at Lebanese University, writing about what would happen if Iran collapses as a state. Unlike previous regime change wars that targeted individual states, what's happening now aims to eliminate the ideological and material infrastructure of resistance across the entire region. As a project rooted in long-standing cause or idea, it cannot be fully crushed. The underlying political and social forces will likely persist. As such, in the event of the Islamic Republic's collapse, resistance wouldn't end, but would transform from a state-led alliance into a looser post-Axis formation. The project would be driven underground, shifting to asymmetric tactics and clandestine operations, and would no longer be centralized or state-led, yet still coherent and strategically disruptive, operating through more fragmented methods. This wouldn't be the usual blowback that accompanies imperial misadventures, but a transactional reconfiguration of power and warfare with diffuse networks capable of targeting U.S. and Israeli interests across multiple theaters over an extended period. It would likely take the form of hybrid war of attrition with no state accountability and no prospect of dialogue. The inevitability of this scenario lies in Iran's foundational logic of resistance and non-submission. What is at stake is not just sovereignty, but the ideological core of a decades-long project. Basically, the point that they're making here is that right now, with the Islamic Republic, you have a nation state that wants sovereignty, understandably, that cares about the retaliatory effects that their civilians will withstand, and therefore are way more willing and way more considerate to diplomacy. If this resistance is changed from a state structure, a centralized state structure, to a decentralized formation, that is going to make it much harder to deal with these different groups that still work to punish the entirety of American assets in the region. If the axis of resistance has no state, they have nothing to lose. Exactly. They are more willing and more capable of taking on tremendous damage. A lot more willing and a lot more capable than the Iranian government currently is. Because even Hezbollah, as a militant faction, still has obligations of civil governance. And because of the obligations that it has to civil governance and the civilian population, take more restrained actions, unless pushed to the brink of destruction. But even now, Hezbollah, with its diminished capabilities, is most likely demonstrating restraint because of their worry that the Dahiyya principle, the Dahiyya doctrine, will be applied to the Lebanese population across the board, and they do not want to do this for that reason. They do not want to fight against Israel for that reason. What's driving this war is not the fear that Iran won't sign a nuclear deal, but the fear that it will. Israel attacked Iran because it feared diplomacy might work. A nuclear deal could lead Iran to be integrated into a new Middle East and allow the United States to pull back from the region. The outcome that would most benefit America is the outcome Israel acted to prevent. I don't know if I agree with the inconsistencies between Israeli methods here and American methods. I don't know. I feel like they're but I will say that Israel definitely does have a more militant attitude, and America certainly takes their notes from Israel as like the advisory role. That is the reason why they let Israel run amok in the region, because they do trust Israel quite a bit. They trust Israel's espionage capabilities, or at least will allow Israel to even violate their own foreign policy goals, because overall they believe Israel and America are in line. And then they are. They have the same goals in the region: complete dominance, complete domination. Israel gets to even sometimes attack Americans and even American military, as they did with USS Liberty, because of the tremendous amount of faith and confidence placed in Israel as a loyal, at the time, Cold War ally. Where are you getting your information on Hezbollah being diminished? What do you mean? The lack of fucking response from Hezbollah thus far is proof alone, and also the fact that their entire leadership command was destroyed. What do you mean? It's coming from Hezbollah itself. Even in the absence of his ideological commitment, submission for Iran would remain on the level of realpolitik, both self-defeating and politically suicidal, as dismantling the nuclear program would only redirect focus towards its capabilities, which were under scrutiny long before the nuclear file, with regime change becoming the next objective should those be neutralized. Exactly. It's a never-ending goalpost shift, right? If it's not the nuclear negotiations, then it's the missile production facilities. If it's not the missile production facilities, then it's actually the regime itself. The final goal being the regime itself. So they will always find a new reason as to why they have to take a militant stance against Iran, because ultimately Iran is outside of the scope of American influence in the region. Having said that, they are quite predisposed to diplomatic processes, and therefore, in my opinion, are willing and able to regularly, with regular frequency, engage in restraint. Restraint that I sometimes think is perhaps self-defeating. Capitulation would lead to forever war and forever siege, where demilitarization, as Syria demonstrates, offers no security, and ceasefires, as in Gaza and Lebanon, function not as de-escalation, but as war by other means. In an asymmetric war such as this one, state survival is itself a form of victory, as it was for Hezbollah in 2006. But if physical survival becomes impossible, the nature of winning shifts from a zero-sum calculus to a lose-lose scenario. The post-resistance moment that followed the weakening of Hezbollah and the Gaza support front marked a phase of reconfiguration where resistance became latent, temporarily deactivated, but not permanently dismantled. A post-Axis resistance, by contrast, would reignite the project without the Axis itself, unleashing a more diffuse and potentially less containable form of confrontation. Knowing exactly where Khamenei is at any given moment, and its obligations, the Iranian regime's obligations to its citizens, creates an environment of stability that America can take advantage of. If America keeps consistently violating the Iranian interest for diplomacy in an effort to avoid further Iranian casualties, then Iran will obviously strike back. But without this centralized form of control, of violent retaliation that is uncontrollable, you will see groups that are significantly more violent and significantly less restrained than the Iranian command is. You will also see sectarian infighting as well, certainly. But this is what happened with ISIS to begin with, right? Anyway, I'll also get into Chinese involvement or lack thereof and the analysis from that on that front in a little bit, as these guys are consistently talking about like Iran involving itself against America. Why are there no ads? Great question, because this broadcast is only sponsored by you, the viewers, in the form of subscriptions. The Piker Broadcasting Service, also known as PBS, is sponsored by you, the viewers, for you, the viewers. Your subscriptions, your donations in the form of subscriptions, allow this broadcast to continue being ad-free. And also, your subscriptions in the form of a $6 subscription or a free one in the form of a Twitch Prime allow the Piker Broadcasting Service to maintain its editorial independence. Thank you. You can also gift subs to the Piker Broadcasting Service.
Mr. President, can you share some of what you've told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
I said, keep going. What do I say?
Have you given him any indication?
Speak to him every day. He's a good man, doing a lot. Been very unfairly treated by his country, I think. Very unfairly treated.
Have you given him any indication that you may seek to aid them more than you have already?
No, I haven't done. So far, he's done a good job. He has been treated very unfairly by his country. You know, he's a wartime president, and he's going through this nonsense. It's ridiculous.
It seems like you agree with him that...
With who?
Yeah, the National Security Council.
It's a very good meeting, yeah.
Anything that came up in particular that?
No, little things, big things, but good meeting. It's working well.
It seems like
See how straight that is? Look, they put that dead straight, and then they pour in the sand. It's amazing, right? Who would think you have to have sand? And it's got to be a very pure sand.
I know you enjoy being president. Do you ever miss building things?
I love construction.
Yeah. Well, it's in your heart, isn't it?
Well, I love it. I know it better than anybody. When I see a train, a railroad going from San Francisco to L.A., I think it's 100 times over budget.
That's incredible.
One of the most incompetent things. That's Newscomb.
And why do they keep funding that?
I think we're not going to anymore. In fact, a little bit of a story. We're not going to fund that anymore. It's out of control. First of all, it doesn't go where it's supposed to. It's supposed to go from L.A. to San Francisco. Now, because they don't have any money, they've spent, 30, 40 times more than it was supposed to spend. And they made it much shorter because it no longer goes into the cities. It stops miles outside of the cities.
Because if you were a
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has warned Washington of irreparable consequences if the US becomes directly involved in Israel's military campaign against Tehran. It's understood that President Trump is considering joining the attacks on Iran's nuclear sites. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley.
For a sixth straight night, Israel kept up its unprecedented assault on Iran. These images, captured by an Iranian television station, show air defences in action above Tehran, trying to stop incoming Israeli fire. This is a building hit in the capital. We don't know the exact target, but Israel says that overnight it hit a university linked to Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guards, as well as facilities linked to its missile and nuclear program. These satellite images show a military base in Tabriz in the northwest of the country, here before and here after it was struck. Donald Trump, who left a meeting of G7 leaders early, has called for Iran's unconditional surrender and is reported to be considering joining Israel's strikes on its nuclear facilities. He's described the country's supreme leader as an easy target. Now, a defiant response from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, his words read out by a presenter on state-run TV. Iranians, he said, are not people who surrender, and any form of US military intervention would be met with what he called irreparable harm. For civilians in Tehran, these are terrifying times. Shops shut, quiet streets. Many people are holed up at home, hiding, we're told, in basements and garages. Many others have already fled the capital, among them Narges Mohammadi, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, who spent many years in Iran's jails.
I witnessed horrendous attacks. They're hitting infrastructure. We have a misogynist theocracy in Iran, with the supreme leader Ali Khamenei on the top, who took us to hell whilst promising heaven. And at the same time now, Netanyahu is also taking us to hell.
Iran is still firing at Israel, but not at the same rate as before. Overnight,
what had made Hezbollah invincible in the 80s and 90s was the secrecy and its relative operational independence from Iran. Famously, the US and Israel were saying that Hezbollah knows where to hit us, but we don't know where to hit them back. If Iran falls, Hezbollah and the AOR will go back, axis of resistance will go back to this model from being led to one Qasem Soleimani to being led by many, many Imad Mughniers. I mean, I think that the Yahya Sinwar lack of communique with even Iran and even Hezbollah unironically was part of the reason why October 7 was as traumatic for Israeli society as it was, and even went beyond what the Palestinian resistance expectations looked like. Like, a lot of these guys rely on training and logistics from the Iranian state. Having said that, however, when they operate independently of the Iranian state, I think that it allows them to operate independently of any sort of Israeli espionage as well.
Missiles were intercepted over Tel Aviv. Some limited damage reported, but no more casualties. In Cyprus, 2 repatriation flights were laid on to bring Israelis stranded abroad back home. Nobody knows how long the war will go on for, how it might escalate or end. And so many Iranians and foreign nationals are escaping Iran if they can, this the border with Pakistan. But many others are trapped where they are, everyone afraid of what could come next. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak with our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bechega, who's in Jerusalem this lunchtime. But first to our North America correspondent in Washington, Nomia Iqbal. And Nomia, the war of words is ramping up. Here we are on day 6. But what exactly do we know about America's intentions? How far will they go?
Well, the world is waiting to see what President Trump will do next. We've not had any reaction from the White House so far. There's been no flurry of social media posts from him like we saw yesterday, although that could happen at any moment. There are reports that the US is leaning towards involvement.
My assessment on October 7 is not necessarily that the Israeli military had Israeli intelligence had no idea that it was going to happen. That is impossible. You have to be an actual child to think that Israel, that has unlimited surveillance capabilities on the Gaza Strip, were looking at these dudes training with parasailing over the coast and using those little scooters that can fly with the Mario Karts or whatever, and they were like, oh, I guess they're just kind of having fun. I think that they definitely knew. But I think it was part hubris and part an over-reliance, maybe, on their espionage capabilities within Iran. And considering the fact that this was done without Iranian involvement, I suspect that has a higher order of priority, rather than what the Egyptian intelligence was telling Israel, what their own eyes were seeing. That's what I think. I think that the independence of the Palestinian resistance, was the reason why that operation was as bloody as it was. and went above and beyond the Palestinians' expectations as well. That's what I think. Like, because I think it, as far as like the bloody retaliation from Israel, people say, oh, this was a operation that they allowed. This was an operation that they allowed. Like October 7 was like known by Israel, but they let it happen because they wanted to go and like do this final solution on Palestinians. They would have had just cause in the eyes of the rest of the globe and in the eyes of like the Israeli population, certainly, if only 10 soldiers were kidnapped and 100 soldiers were killed. Judging by the previous sieges into Gaza, with the casualties that Israel withstood, like they'll have, sometimes 10 people die in missile attacks, and then they would kill 1,000 people, 2,000 people in previous sieges. So even 100 people, and even any sort of entry into Gaza or from Gaza into Israel would have been met with the same exact retaliation. So while I believe that Israel had acknowledged the forewarning that October 7 was going to happen, I think given the lack of communication between Hamas and IRGC, they assumed that it would not be as devastating as possible. They demonstrated hubris, thinking that they were able to quickly make short work, withstand some casualties on the Israeli side, enough that people would be able to people would justify death and destruction. And the movement of the troop positions, for the record, come from the bloodlust demonstrated by Itamar Ben-Gvir on the West Bank. That would have never happened if I think they thought that this would be as severe. October 7 would be as severe. My point is, there is a finite amount of death that Israel was willing to tolerate in order to, if they had forewarning and they totally knew and this was planned, pre-planned by Israel, they would have probably wanted, like, at most maybe 100 Israeli soldiers or maybe a couple civilians dying in the process, and not 1,200 soldiers and civilians being killed, and Israeli society recognizing that they are not as protected as they possibly are.
Rather than diplomacy, and that would involve sending US troops to the region to use those bunker buster bombs to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities deep underground.
Hasan waffles too much? What do you mean? This is an incredibly complex situation. And I'm also speculating on events that have unfolded and what might potentially happen. It's, you want me to make like black and white assessments, but it's really stupid for me to do so, especially when I'm under a microscope in times like this, where people are clearly looking for me to slip up and say something that they can misconstrue deliberately and weaponize against me.
But make no mistake, if that is what the US does, it is a profoundly defining moment of Trump's presidency, seismic. This is a man who has long campaigned for no foreign wars, attacked Barack Obama, accusing him of trying to start a war with Iran, and only back in May said in Saudi Arabia that...
Yeah, they knew, but they calculated about 250 deaths. IDF knew if Hamas was planning to kidnap 250 before the October 7th attack report. Yeah. IDF had precise information about Hamas's intentions, but due to prevailing conceptions in the security establishment and possible negligence by officials, the warning signs were not acted on. I don't know. There's two different attitudes about this. There are people who think this is like pre-planned. They knew full well the full scope of the death and destruction that Israel would experience, and they let it happen specifically so they could kickstart their final solution and have a righteous cause to do this ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. But I think that they knew that there was a military operation. They just did not realize how devastating it would be, because they would have had the casus belli for ethnic cleansing with 10 Israelis being kidnapped and 100 Israelis being killed, not 1,200. Okay, so I think it's a bit of both. I think it's like half hubris, partially relying on like the hubris of Israeli security forces, thinking that they can withstand an attack without severe penalties. The hubris of the over reliance on their technology, the supremacist attitude that dictates that these guys are barbaric and can't actually put together a can't actually put together like a serious military operation. They were wrong on all fronts. But in terms of like moving troop positions into the West Bank to continue doing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, as opposed to the troops that would normally be stationed at the border, I think, like I said, it's partially hubris and partially because they just did not think it would be this deadly. Ami Ayalan said that IOF soldiers were threatened with court martials because of how much they were reporting the Hamas doing rehearsals, saying they've been planning something for 15 years and nothing happens. On the 11th of December 2023, while being interviewed in a video from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. DNI Tulsi Gabbard's closed-door Senate hearing set for Wednesday has been postponed due to committee spokesperson told ABC News. Senate intelligence briefing postponed as tensions rise in the Middle East. They don't want to hear from the intelligence community's assessment on Iranian capabilities because they would rather operate on faulty information or whatever propaganda Israel is drip feeding the American admin. That's so funny. Like, I don't think Tulsi Gabbard is operating as an individual actor who is like truly this anti-imperialist asset. I think she is doing her role, right? She's fulfilling her obligations to the state. But because accurate assessments of Iranian capabilities, the dangers that might present to American troop positions in the region, or even accurate assessment of like Iranian nuclear facilities or enrichment of uranium not reaching the standard of a nuclear weapon is directly antagonistic to Israel's ambition here that America has now signed off on. So they're like, nah, we don't want to hear from you. We need plausible deniability, I guess, which sounds so stupid. This was really funny as well. Scoop, this is from jns.org. The Israel planning chief of the Joint Chief of Staffs, Colonel Nathan McCormick, believes that Israel is a death cult, America's worst ally, and seeks to cleanse Eretz Israel of ethnic Palestinians, according to his semi-anonymous X account. Experts told me his post revealing travel, conversations with foreign partners, and anti-Israel rants were gobsmacking, dangerous, out of place in a Pentagon that works so closely with Israel and a potential foreign intelligence threat. Now, the irony about all of this is that this is exactly you. There are people of different minds in the national security apparatus, as well as amongst the generals, right? There are people who also absolutely despise Israel for understandable reasons. Now, of course, that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because we know who won out under the Brandon leadership. We know which side of the State Department won the ideological battle. The side that said we have to restrain Israel for our own and for Israel's own security purposes lost. Many of them actually openly resigned in the process. This guy seemingly is one of the generals that was removed from their position at the Joint Chiefs of Staff for calling Israel a death cult and saying America's acting as an Israel proxy. No diversity of opinion is allowed in the Trump administration. If you say something against Israel, you should be court-martialed and shot for treason. Are you sure your stutters are your ISP and not your CPU? I think that they are my ISP. HasanAbi head in the military. This guy probably thinks I'm an agent of Iran or an agent of anti-American interests and would probably shoot me. That doesn't change the reality that he also recognizes Israel as a hostile entity to American interests. Okay? He is not a HasanAbi head. He's just someone who understands Israel's volatility and Israel's violent tendencies that end up causing harm to the American project of dominance in the region in the long run. That's it. And they got him. They got his ass. Yeah. Chief Israel planner at Pentagon bashes Jewish state publicly and extensively, according to JNS. I saw some of his tweets. They're very funny. Colonel Nathan McCormick, the Levant and Egypt branch chief at the Joint Chiefs of Staff at J5's Planning Directorate, has referred publicly to Netanyahu and his Judeo-supremacist cronies to Washington having overwhelmingly enabled Israel's bad behavior, and to pro-Israel activists in the United States prioritizing support for Israel over our actual foreign interests. Literally every single thing he said is correct. No notes. No notes whatsoever. And having this kind of attitude is, if I was a guy invested in defending the American State Department, I would welcome this kind of division within the American State Department, because it is of sound mind and a decent critical thinking skills, who hasn't been hit with the John Fetterman ray, is probably going to be a valuable asset. It's always good. It's always good to have someone who is showcasing a difference in opinion here. But of course, no difference in opinion is allowed in the American State Department as of the Brandon administration. JNS has learned that McCormick, who according to, like, this is straight up for the record, okay? This is a foreign nation openly engaging in direct acts of change in the ranks within the American State Department apparatus. They are directly going, hey, you can't have this person in this position of power because they're going against what we want, even if their perspective is ultimately in defense of America's interest in the region. That is crazy. Not even the State Department, the military. The Western states go to great lengths to avoid criticism of Israel, much of the Holocaust guilt, McCormick wrote on social media in April. Israel's actions over decades have prompted the accusations of ethnic cleansing and genocide. You know what's really funny about this, by the way? This might be the least anti-Semitic general in the armed forces. Like, that is the hilarious situation. There are generals who are incredibly on board with Israel and the death cult that Israel is, that are also simultaneously the most anti-Semitic you ever encountered. But of course, from Israel's perspective, that is negligible. That doesn't matter how anti-Semitic they might be. I mean, one of the most famous, what was the guy? It wasn't Patton, right? Who was the general that said, we fought Patton. I think it was Patton who said we fought the wrong guys in World War II. Colonel Patton, like Colonel, not General. Netanyahu and his Judeo-supremacist cronies are determined to prolong the conflict for their own goals, either to remain in power or to annex the land, he wrote on social media in May. I've lately been considering whether we might be Israel's proxy and not realized it yet. Our worst ally, in air quotes. We get literally nothing out of the partnership, in air quotes, other than the enmity of millions of people in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. The U.S. has not been an honest broker, he wrote in June 2024. We have overwhelmingly enabled Israel's bad behavior. General Patton, Colonel McCormick. Apologies for getting the ranks confused. In one post replying to the idea of Gaza's potentially finding refuge outside the Gaza Strip, McCormick wrote that Israel wants to expel them and cleanse Eretz Israel of ethnic Palestinians. On October 11, 2023, 5 days after Hamas' terror attack, McCormick wrote that Israel has an absolute right to respond militarily and civilians may legally be caught in the crossfire, but that Israel's responses always, not hyperbole, disproportionately target Palestinian civilians. I wonder why he made that assessment. Perhaps it's because he has eyes and a functioning brain. You literally believe any media you read? Wait, what? Bro, how much cocaine have you had? You are gurning? Wait, what's the lie here? This guy straight up got removed from his position after this article came out. What are you talking about? What? Also, JNS is not JNS is a propaganda outlet for Israel, is pro-Israeli media. It's one of the outlets that routinely churns out pro-Israeli propaganda. Despite some attempts to anonymize his account, McCormick has repeatedly revealed his name and job title on the platform and has posted photos of himself that match his LinkedIn profile. That includes his uniform name tag. JNS saw a comment from Pentagon and McCormick. How so? What data? This is literally what I do for work every day, he wrote to someone in May. I'm the Joint Staff J5 Israel branch chief. I mean, this dude had bad OPSEC. All I'm saying is he did have very bad OPSEC, okay? You can't be posting like you're in a goddamn War Thunder forum, okay? On August 3rd, he posted a photo of a Meritorious Service Medal certificate issued to Lieutenant Colonel Nathan E. McCormick on June 1st, 2022. He has since been promoted to full colonel. The account is now yeeted, obviously. Shoot, I just found an MSM in a basement. I'm pretty sure it's already in my OMPF, though. Doors open. I can see him being in a War Thunder forum leaking these details as well. Other posts include descriptions of his conversations with generals in the Israel Defense Forces, briefings from Israel's coordinator for humanitarian aid in the Gaza, and aborted plans to send emails over the Pentagon's secret internet protocol router network for sharing classified information. A DoD contractor who has interacted with McCormick described the postings as dangerous. This is the kind of bitter oversharing I'd expect from someone who doesn't know better, the contractor said. But at his level and under his own name and likeness, it's mind-boggling. We have enough OPSEC and public perception problems as it is. OPSEC refers to Operation Security. The contractor raised the question whether McCormick's personal politics influenced the advice his team provides to senior leaders. If this is what he's publicly sharing, who knows what he's saying behind closed doors, the contractor said. Probably less significant and less severe takes about Israel out of fears that he won't be promoted further. So, yeah, I think this was his outlet to be like, these guys suck. Anyway, I wonder who this contractor is. A DoD contractor. Dude, I swear to God, this is just basically foreign intelligence working with a foreign propaganda outlet to rip through the ranks of the American military in an effort to squash out any sort of dissent. Here are some of his other hit tweets, by the way. It's really funny. Sure, anti-Semites say Israel because it's a Jewish ethno-state, but plenty of non-anti-Semitic people, including some American Jews, say it because of Israel's policies and politics. I guess I'd ask, why do you think saying Israel is anti-Semitic? This is Andrew Bernard posting this to show how anti-Semitic this guy is, or how much of a danger he presents. Yep, the U.S. has not been an honest broker. We have overwhelmingly enabled Israel's bad behavior. But Netanyahu and his Judeo-supremacist cronies are determined to prolong the conflict for their own goals, either to remain in power or to annex the land. History of anti-Semitism? What is that shit? This is a retweet of Abir Khatib. All below, campaign to unseat the queen. She won. This is, of course, Francesca Albanese, who Israel sees as like the number one enemy of Israel, who is a fantastic orator. Francesca Albanese, Human Rights Council official with a history of anti-Semitism, claims Times of Israel, can remain in office until 2028 after complaints against her are dismissed. Yeah, so check this one. It's so sad. What is this? I don't know what that is. Come on, stop sending me unverified stuff, unsubstantiated stuff. Anyway, let's keep going.
That the era of foreign intervention was over. So lots of his supporters will be saying, what happened to that man? Could there be regime change? Well, Donald Trump also said yesterday, threatened to potentially kill the supreme leader. So we just don't know what could happen next. And bear in mind, if the US does get involved, how could Iran react to it? Again, we don't know, and it could put the US in a very, very dangerous moment.
Nomia, thank you. Well, let's get the picture then from Jerusalem. Our correspondent Hugo Bechega is there. On the ground, Hugo, how will these words have been received, and what's the latest on the conflict from that perspective?
Yeah, Nina, so Israel has continued to attack Iran. The military said more than 50 planes hit about 20 targets across Tehran overnight, including weapons production facilities. And on the ground in Iran, we've seen those huge traffic jams of residents trying to flee the city, Tehran, because of fears of an escalation of this conflict. Shortages of petrol and food are being felt. Also, some cash machines are not working. So this is the impact. Now, in Israel, as Caroline said, there was a wave of attacks, 2 waves actually, of Iranian missile attacks overnight. The Iranians said they had used for the first time a hypersonic missile, which is a missile that is more difficult to be intercepted by air defenses, but there have been no reports of casualties. And we're seeing that the recent attacks haven't been as intense, which is probably an indication of the impact of these Israeli airstrikes on the Iranian military. And just moments ago, the Israeli government announced that some of the restrictions that had been imposed because of the war are now being eased. There will be, limited gatherings are now being allowed, but crucially, schools and the airspace remain closed. But this is an indication that the Israeli authorities believe that the threat coming from Iran has diminished.
OK, Hugo, in Jerusalem, thank you.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has released a statement as the conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies. He says the Iranian nation will stand firm against an imposed war, just as it will stand firm against an imposed peace. And this nation will not surrender to anyone in the face of imposition. The Americans should know that any U.S. military intervention will undoubtedly cause irreparable damage. His comments follow another night of attacks from both sides as the conflict between Israel and Iran threatens to escalate even further. Let's bring in now Tawheed Asadi is in the Iranian capital Tehran for us. So Tawheed, listening to the statements by Iran's supreme leader, does it mean that Trump's demands are deal breakers rather than deal makers from Iran's perspective?
Yes, indeed. Exactly as you said, it seems that Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is not into such proposals, as we heard from him, that Iran is not going to, an Iranian nation, quote unquote, is not going to accept imposed peace, by which he means that in case the Israelis and the Americans try to impose some preconditions for possible negotiations on peace, Iran is not going to accept. Iran is going to continue. We at least heard 3 important messages from Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei directed towards Americans in his very recent speech. First, he said that the incident took place. The attack, the Israeli strikes, took place while Iranian diplomats were engaged in a trajectory of indirect talks with the United States, and these strikes happens while Iran didn't send out any signal of harsh or military activity while it was engaged in diplomatic negotiations. Also, he said that Iran is not going to surrender. He said that Americans should know about it, and that in case there is going to be a military intervention by the United States in this already complicated, intricate scenario, there is a possibility of further escalations, running the risk of, as we speak to different political analysts, running the risk of dragging the entire region on the verge of a broad regional war. Also, he talked about the United States, and on another perspective, saying that the fact that the United States, quote unquote, the American friends of the Israelis are getting engaged, or are planning at least to get engaged, is indicative of the weakness of the Israeli side, while the retaliatory actions of the Iranian side continues. The reality on the ground, based on what we see here in the capital, is that Israeli strikes still continue.
All right, Tawheed, stay with us, because what we want to do is just to have a listen in to some of the comments which Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei made. It came, of course, in a pre-recorded televised message from an undisclosed location. He was defiant and said Iran will never surrender.
The President of the United States, in unacceptable remarks, explicitly calls on the Iranian nation to surrender. But we say to him, first, make threats to those who are afraid of them. Threats have never influenced the behaviour or thinking of the Iranian people. Second, telling the Iranian nation to surrender is not a rational statement. Wise individuals who are familiar with the Iranian people and their history would never utter such words, because the Iranian nation is not one that surrenders and will never submit to anyone's aggression.
Let's go back to Tawheed Asadi. He's in the Iranian capital, Tehran, for us. And Tawheed, in the light of the rising rhetoric between the two sides, we've seen the US move more assets to the region. Are we aware, are we seeing the Iranians make any moves to prepare for a possible US military strike at this point?
Yes, indeed, Sami. We have been hearing statements on that. First, Iranians are saying, the president and other Iranian officials are saying that Tehran is not interested at all in getting engaged and further escalate the situation, as the momentum thrives on escalations with respect of the recent developments. There is this possibility of getting dragged into this sort of further complicated scenario. We talked to one security source in this regard. He says that Iran has been prepared to get engaged in a war with the United States, and it has been prepared it for over a decade. And also the rhetoric that we speak, we listen to and we hear